So, what do mutants and vampires have in common? Well, they're both incredibly powerful, they've both lived in society for centuries, and they're all gay.
What do they call you? Wheels?
Hey everyone, it's Rose here, and in honour of the spooky season, I thought I'd dress up in my best low-effort vampire Lestat costume and make a video on the complete history of X-Men versus vampires. Because yes, they have fought a lot over the years. The X-Men's very first interaction with vampires took place way back in 1982 in the pages of Uncanny X-Men 159 by Chris Claremont and Bill Sienkiewicz. In this story, after spending an evening with Kitty Pryde and her parents in New York City, on her way home, Storm is mugged and left for dead in a dark alleyway with only a small injury to her neck. She is taken to the hospital where the doctors are unsure whether Aurora will even make the night. The other X-Men are called in to see her, and despite her shaky health, Storm actually improves quite quickly, but has no memory of the attack. Recovering in Misty Knight's apartment, because yes, they were close friends back in the 80s, she struggles to sleep and tries to ignore a voice that's calling out to her, but she eventually gives in, inviting the mysterious person inside. When Kitty returns from her parents, she immediately visits her teammate and discovers that she is not doing well. Aurora can't stand the sunlight, she flinches at the sight of Kitty's Star of David necklace, and she has a mysterious brand new necklace with an embroidered D on it from a secret admirer. With all this evidence, being the nerd that she is, Sprite is convinced that Storm is turning into a vampire. And she's right, as Lord Dracula visits Aurora that night to make her his bride. Kitty interrupts their meeting and tries to kill the Lord of the Vampires. While she's not successful there, she does manage to drive them both away into Central Park. The X-Men, Wolverine, Colossus and Nightcrawler, make a concerted effort to subdue Dracula, but fail, whilst Kitty tries to reason with Storm, whose psychological transformation into a vampire is rapidly increasing. Dracula defeats the X-Men and is reunited with his bride-to-be, when, all of a sudden, Aurora defies his hypnotic hold and attacks him, ultimately regaining her freedom and Dracula's respect. He leaves her be in one piece and promises to relinquish their psychic connection. But a sequel to this story happens just 6 months later in Uncanny X-Men Annual Issue 6 by the same creative team of Chris Claremont and Bill Sienkiewicz. Here, Storm has a really vivid nightmare that she has become a vampire and is turning the rest of the X-Men into vampires too, before reuniting with Dracula. Waking up to realise it's only a dream, Oro is convinced that this was a message from the Lord of the Vampires, who still apparently has a connection with her, and so flies off to confront him in Cornwall, England, of all places. She's greeted by Rachel Van Helsing, the granddaughter of the famous vampire hunter and Dracula's nemesis, Abraham Van Helsing, who has become Dracula's console. Dracula reveals that he did indeed summon Storm here because he is in need of her talents as a thief to steal the Montesi formula, a spell that can kill all vampires permanently. While she tries, the master thief is stopped by Kitty and Colossus, who followed her here, and they steal the formula for themselves. Dracula is about to turn Aurora into an undead creature as punishment for failing, but is rescued just in the nick of time by Wolverine, Cyclops and Nightcrawler. During this battle, Kitty is revealed to be possessed by Lilith, the daughter of Vlad Dracula, and she tries to use the Montesi formula but is stopped. Ultimately, Rachel Van Helsing betrays her master and stakes Dracula, killing him for the time being anyway. Wolverine stakes Rachel as a mercy, Lilith releases her possession over Kitty, who remembers nothing, and Storm is finally free of Dracula's influence, but is left wondering whether this is really over. Now, Storm's interactions with Dracula take a different path in the 1998 series Mutant X, set in the alternate reality of Earth 1298, a universe where Havoc and not Cyclops was an original member of the X-Men. As detailed in a flashback in the Mutant X Annual of 2000, unlike in Uncanny X-Men 159, In this universe, Storm did not escape her battle with Dracula unscathed and was actually transformed into a vampire. However, she still managed to break free of his control and defeat him. Aurora then left the team and tried to suppress her vampiric urges, but as detailed in another flashback in Mutant X issue 13, after crossing paths with Kitty Pryde, she accepts her new being and makes Kitty and Forge her familiars, along with taking the new codename of Bloodstorm. Get it? Because she drinks blood? Later on, the Wind Rider decided to lead the life of a thief and became partners with Gambit. However, after a mission went wrong and Gambit was fatally wounded, she transformed Remy into a vampire to save his life, which drove a wedge between them. By the start of the series, in Mutant X issue 1, Bloodstorm has become a member of the Six, an X-Men-like team led by Havoc, who is secretly possessed by the 616 version, and his wife, Marvel Woman, aka Madelyne Pryor. Now, Bloodstorm retains her weather manipulating abilities, however she can also transform into a mist, can control creatures like bats and wolves, and is functionally immortal. Though, like all vampires, she is weak to sunlight. Throughout the Mutant X series, Bloodstorm does face Dracula again, but considering this is such a batshit series, I feel like I have to cover it all in a future video. Whilst that alternate version of Aurora Monroe was not seen after Mutant X, in 2017, writer Cullen Bunn decided to introduce a new version of Bloodstorm in X-Men Blue, issue 10. This Bloodstorm, whilst identical in design to her predecessor, actually became a vampire while still a thief in Cairo after she tried to pickpocket from Lord Dracula. As a teenage vampire, Aurora joined a team of X-Men. However, the hunger ultimately got the better of her, and she ended up killing several of her teammates, including Professor X and Beast. After this, she fell under the sway of the Goblin Queen, an alternate version of Madelyne Pryor, who was an interdimensional castaway from the 2015 event Secret Wars, who promised to cure Aurora if she joined her X-Men. This team of mystical X-Men arrive in the 616 universe and immediately attack the time-displaced X-Men, the original 5 who had been brought from the 60s to the present, but Bloodstorm betrays Madelyne and stays in the main universe. She joins the X-Men Blue team on their many adventures and even develops feelings for young Cyclops of all people. They do end up going on a date in Extermination issue 1, but it was short-lived as the mutant hunter Ahab from the Days of Future Past reality, don't worry about it, impales Bloodstorm and she dies in Teen Cyclops' arms. Back to the main timeline, in 1998, Dracula, who did not remain dead after the last story, found himself next in the path of mutants in the Generation X vs Dracula annual. In this story, the Lord of the Vampires has set himself up in Massachusetts, nearby to the Generation X team. Chamber hears Dracula's voice in his head offering him anything he wants, and then has a scary dream about his teammate and on and off girlfriend, Husk. The next day, which is Halloween, the rest of the team notice that Jono is acting weird, whilst Husk also has a strange dream that Chamber has his face again and is a vampire. For those that don't know, Chamber is a telepath whose lower face and chest were blown off by psychic energy when his mutation first activated. So this is a bit odd. That night, a vampire attacks Jono at the cinema, and whilst he wins, he leaves with a brand new scarf to cover his face, with a printed D on it. Meanwhile, the Academy receives a visitor that Jubilee invites in. It's Dracula, of course. He terrifies Jubilee and kidnaps Husk, but Chamber, using his new connection to the vampire, is able to locate them, alongside the rest of the Generation X team. Jubilee, Banshee, Sink and Skin all face off against Dracula's followers, whilst Chamber confronts the Lord of the Vampires himself. And he restores Jono's face before feasting on his blood. Husk interrupts, transforming herself into wood to try and stake Dracula, but she fails. And in that moment, Chamber chooses his teammates over having a restored face, and so pulls back a curtain that exposes the villain to sunlight, and Dracula seemingly is destroyed, along with the rest of the building. Whilst they are all convinced that this was not real, as they can't find anything in the rubble. Jono agrees, but notices that he still has 2 bite marks on his arm, something that is never followed up on again. However, later, in Generation X issues 60 to 62 by Jay Farber, former Gen X member Monet St. Croix, who was not involved in that previous story, has her very own encounter with vampires in Europe. Yes, after being forced to leave the Massachusetts Academy by her father, Monet is enrolled in a new boarding school in the Alps, which turns out to have a vampire problem. One night, Em and her roommate Charlene stumble across their fellow classmate Tabby dead after being murdered, and subsequently our protagonist is summoned to the office of the headmaster of the school, Mr. Delacour. He, however, is no ordinary headmaster, as he was the vampire that killed Tabby, and he's now trying to hypnotize Monet. Due to her telepathic abilities, she's actually resistant to his hypnosis, so he just bites her instead, though Monet fights him off with super strength before he can do any serious damage. She attempts to get the police to arrest him, but they obviously do not believe her, which drives Monet to deal with this solo and become Monet the Vampire Slayer, in a very clear homage to Buffy the Vampire Slayer, which was airing at the time. This is actually a very full circle moment, as Buffy is said to be heavily inspired by the Claremont run of the X-Men in the 80s, in particular Kitty Pryde, who, as we've seen, tried to kill Dracula in Uncanny X-Men 159. Anyway, Monet eliminates Tabby, who has returned from the dead as a vampire, defeats the headmaster's secretary, and in a final fight with Delacour himself, throws him against a spire that stakes him through the heart, killing him instantly. Monet recalls that all the other vampires were made inert, the school was closed, and the town was burnt down. And as for herself, she transferred back to the Massachusetts Academy and was reunited with Generation X. See, not all of these stories have a scary ending. In 2006, Frank Thierry and Clayton Henry established some more of Apocalypse's lore throughout history in the X-Men Apocalypse vs. Dracula miniseries. The book opens in 1459 in Romania, where Vlad the Impaler leads his army to a victory against an invading force, before he faces the mysterious legion of the Dark Riders, the Horsemen, and Apocalypse himself, and Dracula is swiftly stomped on by Ensabanur. Literally. Centuries later, in 1897, the descendants of Apocalypse, known as Clan Akaba, have established a base in this city, although many of their members are being murdered. This turns out to be the work of Dracula and his vampires, who seeks revenge against the ancient mutant and his extended family. He even begins to turn members of the group into vampires. Clan Akaba, fearing for their lives, awake their ancestor Ensabanur, and with the combined might of mutants, Apocalypse, and famous vampire hunter Abraham Van Helsing, Dracula is once again killed and beheaded, though Clan Akaba is also effectively destroyed in the process. And a side note to this story, one of the surviving ancestors of Apocalypse who faced Dracula was Jack Starsmore, the great-grandfather of Generation X member Jonathan Starsmore, aka Chamber, which might retroactively explain why Dracula was so interested in him in the Generation X annual. Back to the present, in 2009 Dracula clashed with the entirety of the UK in Captain Britain and MI13 issues 10 to 15 by Paul Cornell and Leonard Kirk. In this story, Vlad the Impaler has secretly garnered support in his bid to invade the country and make Britain the new vampire homeland. From his base on the moon, yes, you heard me right, Dracula has a moon base, the Lord of the Vampires employs sleeper agents within the British government to break a spell that has, up till now, prevented any vampire from entering the UK without being invited in, and is up to Captain Britain, twin brother to famous X-Man Betsy Braddock, mutant and commander of MI13 Pete Wisdom, heroes Black Knight and Pfizer Hussein, alongside heroic vampires Blade and Spitfire, to stop them. Throughout the story, we see the spell destroyed, the team thoroughly defeated, and England invaded by vampires, though this turns out to actually be an illusion placed on Dracula, and in actuality, his forces are decimated by the enchantment because they've not been invited in, and he loses. In 2010, at perhaps the height of the Twilight Mania, the adjectiveless X-Men series was relaunched with a 6-issue event all about X-Men vs. Vampires, Curse of the Mutants by Victor Gischler and Paco Medina. By this point in continuity, the Scarlet Witch had depowered the majority of mutants, leaving just under 200 remaining, and the X-Mansion was destroyed in a previous event, so the X-Men had relocated to San Francisco. Also just prior to this event, Dracula had been murdered in the aptly titled Death of Dracula one-shot on the orders of his son, Zaras, and he became the new leader, uniting all of the various sects. So the event begins in San Francisco with a vampire suicide bomber. Yes, those words did really just come out of my mouth. Who literally explodes in Union Square. And whilst no one is killed, several people are covered in vampire blood, including the X-Men's very own Jubilee, who at this point in continuity has no powers. Thanks, Wanda. Jubilee is put under medical observation, and it's determined that she's been infected with a virus that is altering her psychologically, an aversion to sunlight and an intense craving to give in to the darkness, much like how Storm was affected in her first tangle with Dracula. The X-Men soon realize that San Francisco has become infested with vampires, and begin working with the #1 vampire hunter, Blade. He reveals to them that Zaras has become the new Lord of the Vampires. So Cyclops determines that the best way to defeat this looming threat is by resurrecting Dracula, which Blade obviously disagrees with. And while that discussion is happening, Jubilee ultimately gives in to the craving and escapes Utopia to meet with Zaras, who turns her into a fully fledged vampire. Gambit and Storm kidnap Dracula's body from the aptly titled Vampire Island, whilst Namor retrieves Dracula's head from the depths of the ocean and from the clutches of the Atlantean vampires, the Aqueous. By reattaching his head and removing the stake from his heart, Vlad is resurrected, and Cyclops informs him of his son's actions and that 12,000 vampires are currently within San Francisco, hoping that he will choose to dethrone his son. But the former Lord of the Vampires just leaves without saying anything. Meanwhile, Wolverine has been sent to locate the missing Jubilee, and when he finds her all tied up, Logan is quick to rescue her, but he's completely blindsided when Jubilee bites him, having fully committed to the side of Zaras. Wolverine's healing factor tries to fight off the infection, but ultimately he becomes a vampire too. With this, Zaras' plan is truly in motion. He targeted Jubilee in order to get his hands on Wolverine, the most dangerous mutant, who in turn will help them win the war and allow them to add the mutant race to their ranks, which will make them truly unstoppable. Various X-Men take to the city to try and eliminate the rising number of vampires, and after a failed negotiation between Cyclops and Zaras, the vampire army prepare for war and swarm Utopia. Cyclops leads a team of X-Men with hard-like skin, like Colossus, Husk and Armor, so they can't get bitten, whilst Namor rallies his Atlantean troops, and even Iceman is blessed by a priest, so that he's technically made of holy water. The mutants are pushed back and practically overwhelmed when Wolverine is airdropped in and joins the fight. Cyclops is unfazed by this, and before Logan can properly attack, he presses a button that brings him to his knees. It's revealed that prior to him looking for Jubilee, the science team injected Wolverine with nanites that blocked his healing factor so he could be converted into a vampire. With this button, Logan's healing factor is restored and he fights off the vampirism, regaining his own sense of self. With Wolverine back on the side of the X-Men, the tide is turned and Zaras is furious. His father offers every vampire amnesty if they re-accept Dracula as Lord of the Vampires, and then he beats up his son, removing his head. With Zaras defeated, the X-Men declare that their work is done, and when Dracula threatens to continue his son's work, Cyclops reminds him that they had his body for hours and hours and could have done anything to it. So he leaves and offers them Jubilee, now a vampire, as a gesture of goodwill. She is then kept in a cell on Utopia, whilst her future, now irrevocably changed, hangs in the balance. Jubilee's status quo change into a vampire is the most significant fallout from the Curse of the Mutants event. and is clearly an attempt to bring one of the most recognisable X-Men of the 90s back into the fold as a character again. And to be fair, this did last an incredible 7 years of publication, which is incredibly rare for comics. Her story continues in the Wolverine and Jubilee miniseries by Catherine Immonen and Phil Noto. The X-Club have developed a therapy which involves regular transfusions of Logan's blood, which gives Jubilee a slight healing factor, curbs her hunger, and returns her personality a bit. But she still has to contend with now being an undead evil creature. After being framed for a mass murder by a fellow vampire, the duo go on a journey to uncover the truth, which involves Jubilee being trapped in a separate dimension. Whilst here, she discovers she can turn into a mist, alongside her superhuman strength and speed. After a few weeks on Logan's blood, Jubilee is feeling more like herself, and rejoins the X-Men, no longer trapped in a cell on Utopia. As part of her recovery, Wolverine pairs Jubilee with his clone daughter, Laura Kinney, then going by X-23. And the girls bond and get very close with each other, as they realise they have a lot in common, from their violent tendencies to their fears of abandonment and loneliness. During the schism between Wolverine and Cyclops, Jubilee decides to remain on Utopia with Scott as part of the security team, as she feels like it would be better for everyone if she stayed away from students. On a mission in Symkaria, Jubilee goes missing and meets a vampire known as Razor. He is the leader of the Forgiven, a group of vampires who have trained themselves to feed off the blood of animals rather than the blood of humans, and he offers the teenager to do the same. Locked in a room to detox from Wolverine's blood, Jubilee kept rejecting the animal blood they offered and somehow escaped in the search for human blood. She comes across a farmhouse and nearly drinks the blood of an innocent man, but seeing that she has no reflection shocks her out of this, and she returns to the Forgiven ashamed of herself. Storm and the rest of the team do eventually locate Jubilee, and they come to blows with the vampires. But Jubilee decides to remain with the Forgiven to learn how best to control her vampiric nature. In 2013, Jubilee returned to the pages of the X-Men in the fourth volume of the Adjectiveless X-Men series, the All-Women Team. After controlling her hunger for blood, Jubilee left the Forgiven and began to travel the world. And when in Budapest, she rescues a baby from an orphanage that's been destroyed by a meteor. Named Shogo, Jubilee takes the baby back to the USA and formally adopts him, now having to juggle being a new mother and still being a vampire. In the Battle of the Atom event, Jubilee meets her future self, who is still a vampire and now going by the name Wolverine, and a grown-up Shogo. The older Jubilee is killed in battle, but Shogo tells present-day Jubilee how good of a mother she was, which provides some form of comfort. 3 years later, in Old Man Logan, issue 14 and 15 by Jeff Lemire, Jubilee is summoned by Dracula to Romania. The alternate older version of Wolverine, who was in the 616 at this time, long story, don't worry about it, is made aware of her disappearance and tracks her down, but comes across his former mentee under the control of the Lord of the Vampires and is lured into a trap. Dracula bites and infects this Logan, but seeing someone she cares about suffering gives Jubilee the strength to fight off Dracula's influence, and she teams up with Logan to kill Vlad, with his head being dropped into the sun. During the Resurrection era, Jubilee rejoins the school in Central Park as a mentor to several of the students, including Quentin Quire, Bling, Nature Girl, and iBoy, in the underrated Generation X series by Christina Strain and Almacar Pinner. Here she has to juggle being a teacher, a mother, and a vampire. After a battle with Monet St. Croix, who has been possessed by her brother to become M-Plate, don't worry about it, a starved Jubilee feasts on Chamber's blood, who gives it willingly. However, her son Shogo witnesses this and is then terrified, and does not want to be anywhere near his mother for some time, which puts a further stress on Jubilee. In the later battle with M-Plate, Monet removes Jubilee's light-bending amulet, which protects her from the sun, and throws her out a window into broad daylight. As she's burning to death, Quentin Quire uses his portion of the Phoenix Force to rescue Jubilee, curing her of her vampirism and restoring her mutant powers. So after a very long time, Jubilee is finally alive and a mutant again, and everybody rejoiced. Following the creation of the mutant nation of Krakoa, Wolverine began investigating the vampire nation established by Dracula after Omega Red arrived on Krakoa covered in blood. Witnessing the massacre, Logan teams up with a vampire hunter known as Louise, who is part of the Night Guard in Paris. And we learn that Omega Red is secretly working with Dracula to lure Logan out in exchange for the carbonadium synthesizer. Please don't worry about it. The vampires manage to get a sample of Logan's blood and are able to synthesize it into a formula that protects them from the sun. That's not all though, as Dracula still has use for Omega Red and gets him to join Krakoa as a double agent. However, in a triple agent twist, the villain tells X-Force of Dracula's plan to obtain more Wolverine blood. With this knowledge, a clone body of Logan is created that is deadly to vampires, and Omega Red delivers this to the Vampire Nation, successfully ruining Dracula's plans. During the Ten of Swords event, we were introduced to a brand new, expanded otherworld that included far more kingdoms than just Avalon. One of these regions was the Fair Court of Sevalith, a land of vampires known for its eternal darkness and blood-drinking aristocracy. Whilst Earth vampires are descended from Dracula, the Sevalithi are from an alternate universe where they aren't as driven by hunger and are more sophisticated. Ruled by Countess Oublia and Countess Obscura, Sevalith's favoured currency is secrets and favour over blood, and they have a very intense rivalry with the Kingdom of Avalon, the one most tied to Captain Britain and the Mutants. In the Tournament of Swords, Storm defeated Death, the son of Apocalypse, and left him to be feasted on by the Sevalithi, becoming an ally and an ambassador for the kingdom. Louise, the vampire hunter of the Night Guard, was turned into a vampire during a previous mission, and so Wolverine took her to this kingdom so that she could learn how to be a better vampire. And she even requested help from the Countesses in eliminating Dracula and all of Earth's vampires, though this never came to fruition. However, after Merlin declared war on Avalon and mutants, Sevalith was eager to join in, and so Captain Britain, now Betsy Braddock and not her brother, and her Knights of X had to evade their vampire assassins and free Death from his imprisonment. And that was the last we heard of Sevalith in the X-Sphere. In 2022, Leah Williams and Carlos Gomez created the miniseries X-Terminators, which was originally envisioned as a Dazzler the Vampire Slayer story. After breaking up with her cheater boyfriend, Dazzler gets drunk with Boom Boom and Jubilee, and then the trio get kidnapped and placed into a gladiatorial arena in space. It turns out that Alex, the ex-boyfriend, is a vampire, and actually the son of Zaros, the vampire who turned Jubilee way back in 2010, and he has established this arena as a form of entertainment for his fellow vampires. Laura Kinney, aka Wolverine, has also been kidnapped and stranded here for several weeks, so the four of them team up to escape, killing hundreds of vampires and even fighting the Collector in the process. Upon the team returning back to Krakoa, Dracula and the Vampire Nation sought compensation for the murder of their people. But seeing how Alex and every vampire involved was committing treason, Dazzler was offered a gift of first dibs at revenge. So she uses her light powers to liberate the bar from Alex and his vampires. And then the quartet continue their work as vampire hunters, officially going by the name the X-Terminators. And finally, in 2024, there was a company-wide event centered all about vampires, Blood Hunt by Jed MacKay and Pepe Larraz. Whilst the X-Men are not central to this story whatsoever, the vampires block out the sun globally. Several X-Men members are involved in the resistance worldwide. In Wolverine Blood Hunt, Logan reunites with Louise of the Night Guard to face off against the undead hordes. He also comes across his fellow Team X member Maverick, who has been turned into a vampire. But Wolverine is able to kill the one that turned him and free Maverick from the curse. In X-Men Blood Hunt Jubilee, the former vampire takes to the streets of New York to battle some bloodsuckers. She finds a woman named Sonal who is newly bitten and helps her as she begins to transform, before the Forgiven turn up to help in the battle, as Jubilee has stayed in contact with them even since returning to humanity. Meanwhile, Psylocke and Greycoat are in Tokyo during the blackout, and so Kanon rushes to save as many people as she can. She comes face to face with an actual Japanese legend, the Slit-Mouthed Woman, and kills her seeing it as a mercy after her namesake. Over in Russia, Magic faces an entire town of vampires after being captured alongside some children, but she ultimately uses her magic abilities to defeat all the vampires and save the day. And lastly, in X-Men Blood Hunt, Laura Kinney, the Wolverine, bit of a mouthful, Laura takes on hordes of the undead vampires in a hospital in New York and finds her sister, Gabby, hooked up to IV drips draining her blood. Scout has discovered that these vampires have been draining mutants of their blood in the hopes to gain extra abilities, and the pair go to rescue someone else that has been trapped here. Someone you're not expecting. It's none other than Xaris, son of Dracula. He has been used by the vampires to test this mutant blood and has developed uncontrollable extra abilities. Though after being staked in the chest and about to die, Laura offers him her regenerative blood to save him, despite everything he did to her former bestie, Jubilee. More recently, in the Laura Kinney Wolverine series, it's been revealed that Gabby has been absent because she's been busy teaming up with Xaris to fight mystical threats in Paris. And it seems like, after everything, the son of Dracula has turned over a new leaf and become an ally to mutants. And that's the entire history between mutants and vampires, from Apocalypse washing Dracula in the 1400s, to Jubilee becoming a vampire, to the son of Dracula being besties with Gabby Kinney. So what is your favourite X-Men vampire story? And if you had to choose one X-Man, who would be a vampire next? Let me know down below in the comments, and if you enjoyed this video, please make sure that you hit that like button and subscribe if you want to hear more about X-Men history. With that being said, I'll see you all in the next video.